It all started with the little things. I know it always does, but when you've been married to someone for nearly a decade, you notice when things change, like when they start hiding their phone or when they suddenly have back-to-back work meetings that stretch into the night. I could have written it off as paranoia, but with Sophia, it was like someone flipped a switch. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. She was distant, lost in thought during dinner, barely making eye contact. I tried to ignore it, but it ate at me, gnawing away like a splinter lodged too deep to pull out. Then one night, as she showered, I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a message from someone named Alex, a name I'd never heard her mention. Just one line flashed on the screen before it went dark again. "Can't wait to see you again." Something tightened in my chest. I told myself I had no right to feel suspicious. After all, I had never been the jealous type. But this felt different, like a whisper of something darker. Before I could think twice, I picked up her phone and swiped to read the message thread. It was locked with a password and new one. She'd changed it. When she came out of the shower, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling and pretending to scroll through my own phone. I watched her through my peripheral vision, the way she froze for just a fraction of a second when she noticed her phone wasn't exactly where she'd left it. Her face remained neutral, but the mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of something almost like fear. That was the moment I knew for sure. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I tried to gather more clues, digging into things I'd never thought to question before. I noticed the way she kept her phone close, even taking it to the bathroom with her. She became more careful, more secretive. The next time I heard her whispering on the phone, she stepped out onto the balcony, her voice muffled behind the sliding door. I could barely make out her words, but I caught just enough to know she was lying about where she was going the next day. "I'll see you after the meeting." "Yeah, I'll make an excuse." "No, he won't suspect a thing," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. She was right, though. I didn't confront her then, either. But I started following her. Just once at first. She told me she had an important client dinner downtown. So I waited until she left, and then tailed her in my car, staying a few blocks behind. I watched her pull up to a hotel, not a restaurant, and head inside. She didn't look back. It wasn't until she reached the elevator that she glanced around nervously, scanning for any sign of me. I ducked behind a parked van, my heart pounding in my ears. I stayed out there for an hour, maybe more, just standing in the cold, staring at the hotel entrance. I tried to convince myself that she was there for a legitimate reason, that she was meeting a client in a private suite for work, but I couldn't. Eventually, I drove home, feeling like my insides had been scraped out with a dull knife. When she got back that night, I asked her how the dinner went. She hesitated for just a second too long before she smiled and told me it was fine, boring even, just some mundane talk about quarterly earnings and projections. But that hesitation, that tiny crack, was enough to confirm my worst fears. She didn't suspect that I knew yet, but I could see in her eyes that she was hiding something. The next morning, I couldn't stop myself. As she showered, I tried the passcode on her phone again. A date I knew she wouldn't expect me to remember. Our anniversary. To my surprise, it unlocked, and there in front of me was an entire thread of messages with Alex. Only it wasn't just flirty texts. They spoke in code, but I could read between the lines. He was asking her when she could get away again. She was sending him pictures. None of me or our life together, just herself. They talked about future plans, whispered promises of things they'd do once they no longer had to sneak around. The last message was from him, sent just the night before, while she was supposedly having dinner with her client. "I love how easy it is for you to lie to him. Can't wait for Friday." It felt like the ground had fallen away beneath me. I knew I should have confronted her right then, but I couldn't. Instead, I put her phone back and went through the motions of breakfast like nothing was wrong, forcing my hands not to shake as I poured my coffee. She walked in, still drying her hair with a towel, and kissed me on the cheek, acting as if everything was normal. For a moment, I wondered if she knew, if this whole act was just another part of the game she was playing with Alex. But then she laughed about some silly office drama, oblivious, and I realized she thought she had me fooled. That's when I decided I'd follow her again. But this time, I wouldn't wait outside in the cold. I'd find out exactly who Alex was and what he meant when he talked about getting away. and I'd make sure she saw the look on my face when she realized her secret was out. I followed Sophia again 3 days later, on Friday. The message from Alex had made it clear that something would go down that evening. She claimed she had a work dinner, the same excuse as before. This time, I didn't even bother to hide my skepticism when she kissed me goodbye. If she noticed, she pretended not to. Her smile seemed a little too forced, her fingers lingering a bit too long on the door handle before she left. I grabbed my jacket, took a different car, an old sedan I used to keep in the garage for emergencies, and followed her from a distance. She drove across town, past the restaurant she claimed she'd be at, and finally stopped at a sleek, modern bar on the edge of the city. I parked a few blocks away and walked, making sure to keep my head down as I slipped inside. The place was dimly lit, all polished wood and low light, with private booths lining the walls. I scanned the room until I spotted her in one of the back corners. She wasn't alone. A man about my age, maybe a little younger, sat across from her, leaning in close, a hand on her knee under the table. The sight of it made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, trying to keep my hand steady. I had no plan, no idea what I was even going to do with those photos. They were just proof, I guess. Evidence that I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't all in my head. My fingers itched to walk over there and shove the phone in their faces, to watch the shock spread across Sophia's expression. But before I could act, someone else approached me. "First time catching your wife in the act?" The voice was low, almost a murmur, and I turned to see a man standing a few feet away, just outside the bar's dim light. He was dressed casually, with dark, close-cropped hair and a leather jacket that seemed a little too nice for this place. He glanced past me towards Sophia and her lover, then back to me, as if he knew exactly why I was there. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my pulse spiked. I couldn't afford to draw attention. "Not here. Someone who knows what you're dealing with," he replied, stepping closer until I could see the faint outline of a scar along his jawline. "Name's Dylan. I've got some advice for you, Mark." "How do you know my name?" I hissed, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Had Sophia sent him? Was he some kind of friend of hers? Or worse, an accomplice? Dylan just smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips. "Because I've been following him," he said, nodding towards Sophia's companion. "And by the looks of it, you should be too. Your wife's playing a dangerous game, and you're caught right in the middle of it." I wanted to brush him off, tell him to mind his own business. But there was something about the calm, almost pitying way he looked at me that made me pause. He didn't seem surprised or even particularly interested in the drama between Sophia and me. If anything, he looked concerned. "Why should I trust you?" I asked, feeling my patience fray. "For all I know, you're just here to mess with me." Dylan shrugged. "You don't have to trust me. But I know you're not going to do anything tonight except stew in your own anger. I also know that guy over there," he pointed discreetly to Sophia's companion, "isn't just some random fling. He's part of a network, a business, let's call it. And if he thinks you're a threat to that business, you'll end up in more trouble than you bargained for." His words slid through my brain like ice water. I glanced back at Sophia, who was laughing softly at something Alex had said, leaning into his touch. The scene felt surreal, like I was watching a movie where I was just a bit player, a silent witness to my own humiliation. I turned back to Dylan, my mind churning with 100 questions. "Why do you care?" I asked. "Why even come up to me?" "Let's just say I don't like people getting caught up in something they don't understand," Dylan replied. "Besides, I've been tracking Alex for a while now. Your wife, she's not the first to get involved with him. But this time, things are different. She's deeper into this than you realize, Mark." I clenched my jaw, glancing again towards Sophia. "What do you mean, deeper? What is this, some kind of scam? A scheme?" Dylan's face hardened. "Worse, but it's not safe to talk here. If you want to know more, meet me tomorrow, 3 p.m. at the diner off 12th Street. And don't tell your wife. Trust me on that." Before I could argue, Dylan turned on his heel and walked out, leaving me standing there, confused and angry. I stayed long enough to watch Sophia and Alex leave the bar together, arms brushing, too close for anything innocent. They disappeared into a car, his car, not hers, and I felt something crack inside me. But I didn't follow this time. I just let them go. Driving home that night, I kept replaying Dylan's words. I hated myself for even considering meeting him, for letting this stranger's cryptic warnings get to me. But there was no denying the fact that he knew more than he should. And if he was right about one thing, it was that I didn't know how deep this went. I didn't sleep that night. When Sophia slipped into bed beside me, her hair smelling faintly of a different cologne, I lay awake, my mind spinning. I had planned on confronting her with the photos, forcing her to admit everything right there in the living room. But instead, I found myself waiting for tomorrow, wondering if Dylan's cryptic promises held any answers. Maybe I was desperate, or maybe I just needed to believe there was something more to this than just a simple affair. Because if there wasn't, then all I had left was the realization that my entire marriage had been a lie. And I wasn't ready to face that. Not yet. I spent the next morning in a fog, watching Sophia move through the house like everything was fine, like the night before had never happened. I could see the distance in her eyes, the way she spoke to me without really looking at me. She smiled at breakfast, talked about some new project at work, and kissed me on the cheek before heading out. And as I watched her leave, I kept thinking about Dylan's words from the night before, his warning echoing in my mind. By 3 p.m., I was sitting in a cheap booth at the diner on 12th Street, staring at a coffee I hadn't touched. The place was empty, just a few regulars in the back nursing their meals. Dylan arrived exactly on time, sliding into the booth across from me like he'd done it 100 times. He still wore that same leather jacket, but his expression was colder, more serious than it had been the night before. "You came," he said, not sounding surprised. He flagged down a waitress and ordered a black coffee, then leaned back, watching me with that same calculating look. "Good? Because we need to talk about what your wife's gotten herself into." "You said she was in danger," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What the hell did you mean by that?" Dylan took a sip of his coffee, considering his words carefully. "Alex, that's the guy she's seeing. Isn't just some random affair, Mark. He's part of a group that launders money through real estate deals and small businesses around town. It's a nice, clean way to wash dirty cash. But every now and then, they need someone on the inside, someone who's close to their targets but not too close to the heat. Someone like your wife." My throat tightened, and I could feel my hands clenching into fists under the table. "You're saying she's working with him? That she's part of, what, some kind of scam?" Dylan shook his head, setting his cup down. "It's not that simple. She might have thought she was just helping him out, handling some finances, signing off on a few deals. But whether she knows it or not, she's in too deep. The authorities have been sniffing around this group for months, and if they catch on to her connection, she's going down with them." I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was lying, that this was all just some elaborate trick to mess with my head. But the way he spoke, the conviction in his voice, made it impossible to dismiss. I thought back to the time Sophia had mentioned new investments, new friends she'd made in her networking circles, things I hadn't paid much attention to back then. But now, those pieces were sliding together in a way that made me feel sick. "Why are you telling me this?" I demanded. "What do you get out of it?" Dylan hesitated, his expression darkening. "Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see this operation fall apart. And right now, you're the only one who might be able to get close enough to blow it open. You can turn her in, use the evidence you've got, and maybe get yourself out before it all comes crashing down. But you need to be smart about it. Because if Alex or his people find out that you know, they won't hesitate to take you out of the equation." His words left me cold. I'd come here hoping for answers, but all I had were more questions, more doubts. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "What do you expect me to do then? Just betray her?" Dylan leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "She already betrayed you, Mark. You think she's going to cover for you when things go south? No, she's going to do whatever she has to do to save herself. And when that happens, you better be ready to make your own move." He slid a folder across the table, the edges worn, as if it had been handled 100 times before. Inside, I found grainy surveillance photos of Sophia with Alex. Photos of them together outside the bar, at the hotel, even one of them leaving a real estate office I didn't recognize. I stared at the images, my mind reeling as I realized how much Dylan had been tracking them. "Take these," Dylan said, his voice low. "They're a start, but you need more if you're going to survive this. Keep digging, and when you're ready, We'll talk about the next step. I looked down at the folder, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and fear. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But as much as I wanted to walk away from this mess, I knew I couldn't. Dylan was right about one thing. Sophia wasn't going to protect me if things went south. And deep down, some part of me needed to understand why she'd done it. Why she'd chosen this stranger over me. I didn't say anything as I grabbed the folder and left the diner. Dylan watched me go, a grim look on his face, as if he knew what kind of choice I was making just by taking those photos. Back home, I confronted Sophia that night, laying the photos out on the table like cards in a game I didn't know the rules to. She froze when she saw them, her face going pale. For a second, she looked like she might try to laugh it off, like she'd make up some excuse. But then she saw the look in my eyes, and I knew she realized the game was up. "What is this, Mark?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Where did you get these?" "That doesn't matter," I shot back, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "What matters is that I know you've been lying to me, Sophia. About him. About everything. And I'm done pretending I don't see it." For a long moment, she just stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the right words. Finally, she sank into a chair, rubbing her forehead with one hand. "It's not what you think," she said softly, but the edge of panic in her voice told me it was exactly what I thought. "Alex, it's complicated, Mark. I didn't want you to get involved." "Too late for that," I snapped, throwing the last photo down on the table. It was the one of them outside the hotel, his arm wrapped around her waist. "So, why don't you start telling me the truth for once?" She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like regret in her eyes. But it passed quickly, replaced by a cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said quietly. "It's not just about me and him. It's bigger than that. And if you don't back off, you're going to get yourself killed." I wanted to believe she was warning me out of concern, but the hardness in her tone told me otherwise. She wasn't trying to protect me. She was trying to scare me off, to keep me in the dark. And suddenly, I realized that whatever I thought I'd known about my wife, I'd only seen the surface. Beneath that, there was a stranger with secrets I might never understand. And for the first time, I wondered if I was in over my head. I spent the next few days walking through life like I was trapped in a fog, my thoughts circling the same grim questions over and over. How long had Sophia been lying to me? What else had she hidden, buried behind the mask of our life together? But every time I confronted these questions, I found myself thinking about Dylan's warnings, the photos he'd given me, and his vague hints about the danger I was now caught in. And it terrified me that, as much as I hated it, he might be the only person I could trust. On the third day, I found myself standing outside a seedy bar downtown, one of those places that always smelled like old beer and regret. I texted Dylan to meet me here, away from Sophia's watchful eyes. He showed up late, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You look like hell," he remarked, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. "Guess the honeymoon phase is over, huh?" Enough with the jokes, I snapped, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. The bartender was at the far end of the counter, and the other patrons were too deep into their drinks to care. "You said you could help me, so start talking." Dylan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've been digging into your wife's new friend, Alex. Turns out he's got connections with a guy named Marco Alvarez, a fixer in the money laundering world. They use legitimate businesses as fronts to move large sums of cash, real estate, luxury cars, that sort of thing. And your wife, well, she's been helping them." The weight of his words settled over me like a suffocating blanket. "You're saying she's laundering money?" "She's the perfect middleman. Respectable job, clean record. No one would ever think to look at her twice," Dylan replied. "She probably thought it was a quick way to make some extra cash, get in and get out before things got messy. But people like Marco don't let you walk away. And neither does Alex." My mind reeled. I'd known there was more to her betrayal than just another man, but I'd never imagined she was involved in something like this. A new fear took root in my chest, spreading like poison. If the authorities caught wind of this, if she got arrested, everything we'd built together, all the lies would come crumbling down around us. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "What do they want from me?" Dylan gave a humorless chuckle. "Right now, they probably just see you as a loose end. Someone who could blow the whole thing open if you find out too much. That's why I'm warning you, Mark, because I've seen guys like Alex before. He'll cut you loose the second you become a problem." "And you?" I challenged, narrowing my eyes. "Why are you doing this? What's in it for you?" Dylan's expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I lost someone to Marco's crew a few years back. My brother. He thought he could handle them, thought he was smarter than they were. But when he tried to back out, they made an example of him. Since then, I've been trying to find a way to take them down. And when I saw your wife meeting with Alex, I thought maybe I could use this to get closer." I stared at him, trying to gauge the truth in his eyes. Part of me still wondered if this was just another layer of manipulation, a way for him to use me like he claimed Alex was using Sophia. But another part of me, the part that was scared and desperate, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Dylan was telling the truth, and that he could help me. "Let's say I believe you," I said slowly. "What's the plan? How do we get out of this?" Dylan smirked, a flash of something dark in his eyes. "We keep digging. We gather enough evidence to use as leverage. Photos, bank records, anything that ties Alex and Marco to the money laundering. And then we use it to force them to back off. If we do it right, we can scare them into letting you walk away." "And Sophia?" I asked, my throat tightening. "What happens to her?" Dylan's expression turned cold. "That depends on her, doesn't it? If she's willing to help us, maybe we can get her out of this mess too. But if she's loyal to Alex, you need to be prepared to make a choice, Mark. Because she's not going to pick you." That night, I stayed up late, pacing around the living room while Sophia slept upstairs. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, charging. For once, she hadn't taken it with her to bed, and the sight of it filled me with a twisted sense of opportunity. I knew she'd never let me see it willingly, but if I could access it again, maybe I could find the proof that Dylan and I needed. It took a few tries, but I guessed the new passcode, her birth year. As I scrolled through her messages with Alex, I found details that made my blood run cold. Mentions of transfers, coded conversations about investments, and meeting deadlines. I took photos of every message thread, every piece of evidence that hinted at her involvement in Alex's business. And as I did, I realized that this was no longer just about finding out the truth. It was about protecting myself from whatever hell she dragged us into. The next morning, I met Dylan again, handing over the photos I'd taken. He looked through them in silence, then nodded. "It's a start. We'll need more, though. They've been careful covering their tracks. But if we can track one of these investments back to Marco's people, we'll have a real shot at turning this around." I swallowed the rising fear in my chest, clenching my fists to keep my hands from shaking. "And what happens if we can't?" Dylan's smile was grim. "Then you'd better have an escape plan, because if Marco finds out you're onto him, he won't stop until you're out of the picture." The following days passed in a blur of lies and half-truths. Sophia seemed more on edge than ever, her eyes darting toward me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. I could tell she sensed the shift between us, but she didn't know how much I'd uncovered. And I made sure to keep it that way, playing the part of the oblivious husband. At night, I'd lie awake next to her, wondering when it would all fall apart. Wondering if Dylan was right, if when push came to shove, she'd sacrifice me to save herself. It felt like I was walking a tightrope, each step more precarious than the last. And below, there was no safety net, just the dark abyss of everything I thought I knew crashing down around me. But the hardest part was realizing that, deep down, some part of me still loved her. Even now, even knowing what she'd done, I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some version of events where she wasn't the villain. But every new piece of evidence chipped away at that hope, leaving me with a raw, aching emptiness where trust used to be. Dylan's warnings played on repeat in my head. You need to be prepared to make a choice. But the closer we got to the truth, the more I realized that choice would come with a price. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to pay it. Dylan's plan took shape over the next few days, an intricate web of misdirection and bait that we hoped would draw out Alex, and maybe even Marco, the mysterious figure who loomed behind the scenes. It was risky, but I was past the point of caring about risk. I wanted answers, and I wanted Sophia to see that she couldn't keep me in the dark anymore. The plan was simple. I would set up a meeting between Sophia and Dylan, framing it as if I had figured out more than I actually had. The idea was to rattle them both, force Sophia to reveal more about her connection with Alex and Marco, and push Alex to show his hand. I sent her a text from an anonymous number, saying I had information that could bring everything down, and that I would only share it if she came alone. Dylan would be waiting, hidden nearby with a camera, ready to capture any slip-ups. We'd chosen an old, abandoned warehouse down by the docks, a place where no one would be around to interfere. It was dramatic, sure, but we needed a place where I could control the situation. Sophia arrived right on time, her car crunching over the gravel as she pulled up outside the warehouse. She stepped out, looking around nervously, and for a moment I almost pitied her. The fear in her eyes was real, the way she clutched her purse tight against her body as she scanned the shadows. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, and the way she'd slipped into Alex's car without a second thought. Pity had no place here. I stepped out from behind a stack of rusted crates, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. She froze when she saw me, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion to something sharper. Anger, maybe, or desperation. "Mark, what is this?" she demanded, her voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice cold as I approached her. "What's this all about, Sophia? Why don't you tell me about Alex? About Marco?" She flinched at the names, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. But instead of crumbling, she drew herself up, her chin tilting defiantly. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're way out of your depth, Mark. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Maybe not," I admitted, feeling my own anger bubble up, hot and vicious. "But I know enough to see what you've been hiding. I know about the money, the transfers, the lies. Did you really think you could keep all of this from me forever?" Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. But she covered it quickly, her voice turning sharp. "You need to stop digging, Mark. For your own sake. You think you're going to scare me into, what? Confessing? Begging for forgiveness?" She took a step closer, and for a moment, her expression softened. "Just let it go. It's not too late for us to walk away from this." But her words only made my resolve harden. "Walk away? After everything you've done? No, Sophia. I want the truth. All of it." She stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Then, she shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. You never did. If you keep pushing, they'll kill you, Mark. And they won't stop with you. They'll come for me too." "So you admitted then," I pressed, taking another step closer. "You admit you're in this with Alex, with Marco. How deep does it go, Sophia? Were you planning to take me down with you?" Her eyes flashed with something. Regret, maybe, or anger. But she didn't get the chance to answer. A new voice cut through the air, cold and mocking. "Looks like we have ourselves a little family drama." I turned to see a figure stepping out of the shadows. A tall, lean man with a cruel smile that I recognized from the photos Dylan had shown me. It was Alex. He sauntered toward us, hands in his pockets, his gaze shifting between me and Sophia like he was assessing a piece of merchandise. Behind him, another man followed, broader, with the same calculating look. This had to be Marco. Sophia's face went white, her hands trembling as she backed away from me. "Alex, this isn't what it looks like," she stammered, but Alex cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like," he said, turning his attention to me. "You should have stayed out of it, Mark. But since you're here, let's talk about what happens next." I clenched my fist, trying to keep my voice steady. "You think you can scare me into backing off?" Alex's smile widened, but before he could answer, there was a sharp click from the shadows. Dylan stepped out, a camera in hand, its red recording light blinking in the dim light. "I'd think twice before making any threats, pal. Everything you just said, it's all on tape. Now, how about you tell us the rest?" Alex's expression faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flash of uncertainty in his eyes. Marco, however, only scowled, pulling out a gun from beneath his jacket, leveling it directly at Dylan. "You think we care about some recording?" he growled. "You're both dead men. And as for you, Sophia, you should have known better than to drag him into this." The tension snapped, and before I knew what I was doing, I lunged forward, grabbing for Marco's arm. The gun went off, a deafening crack that echoed through the warehouse, but the shot went wide. We struggled, and I caught a glimpse of Dylan diving out of the way, the camera clattering to the ground. Sophia screamed, scrambling backward as Marco swung the gun toward her. But Dylan was quicker, tackling him from behind, slamming Marco into the ground with a bone-jarring thud. The gun skittered across the concrete, disappearing into the shadows. For a moment, everything was chaos. Pounding footsteps, grunts of pain, the clatter of metal against the floor. I grappled with Alex, the two of us exchanging desperate blows. He managed to throw me off balance, sending me sprawling across the ground. I looked up just in time to see him grab Sophia's arm, dragging her toward the exit. Her face twisted in pain, but she didn't resist, casting one last panicked glance back at me. I forced myself to my feet, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Let her go," I shouted, but Alex only laughed, pulling her closer. "Sorry, Mark, but your wife made her choice, and now you're going to pay for it." The sound of screeching tires cut through the air, and suddenly, headlights flooded the warehouse. A car barreled toward us, brakes squealing as it came to a stop. For a split second, I thought it might be reinforcements, someone coming to help, but then I recognized the driver, Marco's backup. "Time's up, Mark," Alex said, shoving Sophia into the car's back seat before climbing in after her. "Say goodbye to your little sidekick." The car doors slammed shut, and with a roar of the engine, they peeled out of the warehouse, leaving me gasping for breath in the dust-choked air. Dylan staggered over, clutching his side where Marco had landed a hard blow. He was bruised and bloody, but alive. "They're going to run," he said, his voice rough. "She's not coming back, Mark. Not after this." I knew he was right. As the car's taillights disappeared into the night, I felt a hollow ache settle in my chest. I thought I could force the truth out of her, that maybe there was still a chance to save her, to save us. But in the end, she'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. After the warehouse, everything felt like a blur. I should have gone to the police right away. I had enough evidence now. Dylan's recordings, the photos, everything I dug up on Sophia's phone. But instead, I found myself pacing around my living room, the weight of it all pressing down on my shoulders. I kept replaying the look in Sophia's eyes as Alex dragged her into that car, the way she didn't resist. Was she scared? Angry? Or was it relief that she was finally out of my reach, free to follow Alex to wherever they were running? Dylan sat slumped on my couch, a bloodied rag pressed to his head. His camera lay on the coffee table, cracked but still intact, its red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. "You're not going to get another chance, Mark," he said, his voice hoarse. "If you don't do something now, they're gone for good." I shook my head, trying to make sense of the tangled mess of my own thoughts. And then what? I turn her in, and what happens to me? I'll be dragged into this mess, labeled as an accomplice or worse. They'll bury me along with her. Dylan leaned forward, wincing from the pain in his side. "That's one option, but there's another way. We don't have to go to the cops right away. We could use this evidence against them. Sell it, leverage a payout. Marco's people would pay a lot to make this go away quietly." I stared at him, my mind recoiling at the suggestion. "You're talking about blackmail, extortion. I'm talking about survival," he shot back. "Look, you've seen what they're capable of. They're not going to let you walk away from this clean. But if we make it worth their while, if we promise to keep our mouths shut in exchange for a payout, they might let us walk away." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died on my tongue. He wasn't wrong. There was no guarantee that the police would protect me, and I had no illusions about Sophia coming back to save me. If anything, she'd probably throw me under the bus the moment she got the chance. The idea of taking the money, of getting a clean break, was tempting in a way that left a bitter taste in my mouth. But at what cost? I glanced down at the photos scattered across the coffee table, the proof of everything she'd done. And I realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me and the kind of person I was willing to become. "Even if we pull this off," I said slowly, "what's stopping them from coming after us later? from sending someone to make sure we don't become a problem down the road. Dylan met my gaze, his expression hard. That's the risk we take. But it's better than ending up in a ditch somewhere, isn't it? I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his words sink in. Part of me wanted to reject the idea outright, to hold on to some shred of the person I used to be before all of this started. But I couldn't ignore the dark reality staring me in the face. There was no clean way out. Not anymore. The next day, I used a burner phone to contact Alex. I kept my message short, simple. I have the recordings. If you want them, meet me tonight. I included the address of a parking lot on the outskirts of town, a place where I knew there'd be no security cameras. It was a gamble, but I was done playing it safe. Dylan and I arrived an hour early, parking a few blocks away to keep an eye on the lot. As we waited, the tension between us grew thick, the unspoken possibilities hovering in the air. Dylan had his own reasons for being here, his own vendetta against Marco and Alex. But I could feel his doubt, the same question that gnawed at me. Could we really trust each other, or were we just using each other until the end? Just after sunset, Alex's car pulled into the lot, headlights cutting through the darkness. He stepped out alone, scanning the shadows, his hand resting on something tucked into his jacket. A gun, no doubt. I took a deep breath and motioned for Dylan to stay back as I stepped into the open, the folder of evidence clutched in my hands. "Mark," Alex called, his voice echoing in the empty lot. "Let's be reasonable here. No need for anyone else to get hurt." I could hear the falseness in his tone, the condescension that dripped from every word. But I forced myself to stay calm, to meet his gaze without flinching. "Where's Sophia?" I demanded. He smirked, shaking his head. "Sophia's where she wants to be, Mark. You think she'd come running back to you? No. She knows you're just trying to save your own skin. But don't worry. I'm here to make a deal. How much do you want?" I felt a flash of anger, my hands tightening on the folder. "I'm not doing this for money, Alex. I just want out. You take this, you get your people off my back, and I disappear. That's the deal." Alex studied me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might agree. But then, his eyes flicked past me, and I realized he was looking for Dylan. The gun slid out of his jacket, glinting in the dim light. "You brought your little friend along, didn't you? You're not very good at this, are you?" The air cracked with the sound of a gunshot, and Alex staggered backward, clutching his shoulder as blood bloomed across his shirt. Dylan emerged from the shadows, his gun smoking, his expression cold. "Drop it," he ordered, his voice steady as he trained his weapon on Alex. Alex's face twisted with pain and fury, but he let the gun fall, his free hand clutching the wound. "You're making a mistake," he spat, glaring at both of us. "You think this ends with me? Marco's going to find you. He's going to find her." The mention of Sophia made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to focus. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Now get out of here, before I change my mind." Alex's eyes burned with hatred, but he seemed to recognize the hopelessness of his situation. He staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, and stumbled back toward his car. As he drove away, his taillights disappearing into the night, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread settle in my chest. Dylan lowered his gun, exhaling slowly. "He's not going to forget this, Mark. You know that, right?" I nodded, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle into my bones. "Yeah, but maybe he'll think twice before coming after us." Dylan glanced down at the folder of evidence, then back at me. "So what now? We burn it, disappear?" I looked at the folder, feeling the weight of the choice I was about to make. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't keep running from the truth. Not anymore. I took out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't thought I'd ever use. 911. I handed the phone to Dylan, meeting his confused stare. "Tell them everything," I said quietly. "Let them clean up the mess." Dylan hesitated, but then a grim smile tugged at his lips, and he nodded. As he spoke to the dispatcher, I turned away, staring out into the darkness where Alex had disappeared. I knew I just crossed a line I could never uncross. I betrayed Sophia, maybe for the last time, and when the police arrived, there would be no going back. But as the sirens grew closer, I found myself wondering if I'd done the right thing. or if I'd just traded one kind of darkness for another. Maybe I'd never know, but at least now I wouldn't have to live with the lies.